This is Spiritual Psychic Cynthia Killian, and I hope you're having a wonderful day, lovely one. I'm here tonight with my friend Romeo, as you can see on my right shoulder here. And Romeo is a lilac-crowned Amazon parrot. And him and I are just hanging out on a Friday night. And I thought that I would make this little video for you because I know that many people visiting my website haven't had the chance yet to meet with me in person. And I also know that sometimes it's nice to get a human feel for the person behind the website that you're visiting. So I thought I'd start off just by telling you a little bit about myself. And of course, there's also lots of written material on this site where you can read about some of my experiences and just my life as a psychic and what it has been like for me so far. I often get asked when I knew that I was psychic, and I have to say that was an ongoing process for me. My first memory is actually of sensing a ghost, and this would have been when I was really young, probably at about the age of 2, because we did live in a house that was haunted. And I won't go in that whole long story now, but there were many interesting phenomenons. Oh, Romeo's trying to eat my earring here. Can I have that earring back? So this is life with parrots. In any case, as I was saying, I grew up in the very early years of my life in a house that was haunted, and the ghost wasn't always so happy that we were there, and in the end we ended up having to leave the house because basically it was burnt down by the ghost. True story. And even though my mother was a diehard Protestant, a very extreme Protestant, at one point in time before we left the house, she actually had a Catholic priest come out and exorcise the house. And at that time, that was when immediately afterwards the house was burnt down. So it was somewhat interesting. I don't think the ghost liked the exorcist coming out. After that, at the age of 5, I had a vision when I was out in the woods with my older brother. He liked to go out and hunt and stuff. And I had wandered off by myself, and I had this lovely, beautiful vision of a very large white buffalo spirit moving from the sky down to where I was at in a field and merging with me and then moving through me. And from that point on, I knew that I was called to do God's work in this life. I knew that I was called to be some kind of prophet or a seer. I didn't really know those words exactly, but I knew that there was a calling. I knew that the white buffalo had come to me for a reason. And at that time, I was only 5 years old, so you have to understand I didn't know about the stories around white buffalo, calf woman, or really much at all. I didn't know much at all intellectually, but the experience was so moving for me. I felt a oneness with all of life in that moment, that I knew that I was to dedicate my life to the service of humanity. So those were some of my early childhood experiences. My life growing up was maybe not easy, but I guess lots of people's lives growing up are not easy. I always say that I grew up in a normal, dysfunctional family. So that seems to be more of the norm nowadays than not. But as a result of some of my early family events, my mom, you see, she was a single mother and she worked very hard. She worked a lot to take care of us, but she wasn't able to be there a lot of the time too. So as a result of that, I got to spend, don't bite me, sweetie. Ouch. Parrots can be naughty sometimes. I got to spend a lot of my childhood outside in nature and attuning with plants and animals. And this was an excellent psychic education for me, because basically by becoming closer to the plant and animal kingdom than I was to the world of humans, it helped to open up my gifts further. And one of my favorite childhood memories was of the railroad tracks that we lived by, and they were actually at that time lined with quartz crystal, believe it or not. So I would go over there and play with the quartz crystals and bring back a couple to home, okay, maybe more than a couple. And that was one of my favorite activities as a child, was playing with quartz crystals. And of course, this is long before I knew about the healing powers of quartz. Well, I knew, I just didn't have the intellectual learning. When I was 13, I met a man who was a white witch or healer. And he thought I was a lot older than I was, because I looked a lot older at the time. I'm a Capricorn, so we can look any age we need to. And not really knowing how young I was, he accepted me as a student. And so I apprenticed under him for a couple of years. And I had some other teachers after that, but he was really my main teacher, who taught me about the healing powers of plants and crystals, and really working in harmony with nature. And this helped me to begin the process of coming to terms with my psychic gifts. I think I realized I was psychic really when I was 13 years old. And I told my friend at the time, I said, Amy, she was my best friend, I said, I think I'm psychic. And she said, no, you're not. And I said, seriously, I'm psychic. And she said, well, prove it to me by reading my mind. Now, first of all, lots of psychics can't read minds. That's telepathy, and not all psychics have a gift of telepathy. But I thought I would indulge her. So I said, okay. And I read her mind correctly once. She said, well, you have to do it 3 times in a row. I'm like, okay. And consequently, I went on and I read her mind 2 more times for a total of 3 times in a row. And at that point in time, Amy turned to me and looked at me and said, man, Cindy, you're really freaking me out. And she left and went out the door. True story. So after that, I kind of decided I wouldn't be psychic for a little while, if you know what I mean. I realized in that moment that if it could freak out my best friend that much, how much more would it freak out the people around me? So even though I stayed involved in my spiritual studies and in studying the various healing systems and the esoteric systems, I really didn't talk much about being psychic anymore, and I pretty much put that part of myself in the closet, so to speak, for a number of years after that. All right, so fast forward about 7 or 8 years, and I was living in North Carolina. And at that time, I had a friend who was running a New Age bookstore, I guess you would call it that, in a flea market. And she had a computer there where she was running astrology charts. Now, this was really cutting edge back then, because this was, I think, maybe before the internet or right before it. And hardly anybody had these programs at home. I mean, now you can go and run your chart online. But anyway, Deborah was a tarot card reader, the woman who owned the store, not an astrologer, although she knew a little bit about it. And she needed somebody to interpret these charts for people who were buying them through the store. In other words, they had the wheel, they had the charts, but they didn't really know what it meant. And I had studied astrology from my early days when I apprenticed with my teacher. That was part of learning the ways of the White Witch and so forth, and the healer. And I was actually quite good at it, and it was a way that I could use my psychic ability without saying that I was psychic, if you know what I mean. Because astrology is looked at as a science, and even though I was a psychic astrologer, I could always just say, hey, it's just in the charts. So anyway, Deborah said to me one day, she said, I have these charts I'm running. I really need somebody to read these charts for my clients, to write reports or do something like that. And I heard myself saying, well, I could do that. Now, I don't know what I was thinking, because I'd never really done it before for strangers. I'd only done it for my friends. But in any case, I volunteered for that job, and hence started my career actually as a reader. And this was probably, I want to say it was before my mother died. My mother passed in 1996, so it must have been 1995 or somewhere around that time. And I started out writing astrology reports for people, which back then, you know, like I said, it was different. You know, even though Deborah had a computer that would print the charts, I didn't, and I used to draw up all my charts by hand. So you actually had to know math to do astrology back then. It was quite a different process. And I would write these reports for these people who were interested in it, and then Deborah would sell them to them. Actually, she would get the reports to them. And I never really met with my clients, because at that time I really wasn't comfortable being out about my gifts. And I just really wouldn't have been comfortable meeting with someone one-on-one. And that's hard to believe nowadays, because nowadays I feel very comfortable meeting with people, but those days were different and I was not comfortable with my gifts at all. And a lot of things happened since then, and one of the interesting things that happened a few years after I got my start was I kept feeling my psychic gifts becoming more and more stronger, and especially after my mother died, because I was under a lot of stress. And it seems like when natural born psychics get under a lot of stress, the gifts will increase. I don't know why that is, but it just is. And especially if you're someone who's hiding your gifts, if you're someone who's afraid of them or trying to deny it, it's like the stress and the pressure itself brings out the gift further. So I had an experience where I was at a psychic fair doing astrology readings, and I want to say this was in 1996, I believe, or 97, right around there. And I had a really old computer, and anyway, to make a long story short, the computer crashed. And I had probably about 7 people waiting in line to get readings with me. And so I heard Spirit telling me, go ahead and keep doing readings. I was like, well, I don't want to do just plain psychic readings. I want to do astrology because that felt so much safer, but Spirit said, just go ahead and keep doing it. So the next person sat down. I informed them that my computer had crashed. I couldn't do an astrology reading for them, but asked them if they'd like me to do a psychic reading for them instead. And they said yes. So hence was born my career as a psychic. And about at that time, my gifts had opened up so tremendously that I couldn't turn them off. And I actually was having phenomenon. Stereos would turn on and off, the dishwasher would turn on and off, furniture would move. I found that the more I resisted my gifts, the more there were strange phenomena in the physical environment around me. So I really just started to run with it and to embrace the gifts. And at that time I started focusing more on doing psychic work, which has led me to where I'm at today as a medium and a channeler. And this has been a long, wild ride for me, a grand adventure. And I continue to look forward to the future and to where I will go then and how I will serve more deeply even yet. So I thank you for taking these few minutes to get to know a little bit about me and my story. And as I said earlier, there's also some written materials on this website you can check out if you're curious about how I came into an understanding of my gifts and what that ride was like for me. Many blessings, beloved one.